Okay, we're back at the lathe again. And if you remember last time, we mounted the wood with, by the way, the wood I think is Sycamore, looks to me to be Sycamore. And last time we mounted it on a faceplate and put it on the lathe, brought up the tailstock for security, and we're ready to start turning. Now, we're not going to talk about how to turn. We're going to, and what tools to use and so forth, what speeds or any of that business. What we're going to do is talk about how you turn a bowl from this chunk, and that would be when you reverse it, how you, when you start using the chuck, and the hollowing process and so forth. And some other time we'll talk about what tools to use. Okay, we're going to start off with slow speed because we have a lot of corners. And this is the most unsafe portion of turning because chunks can come off of it and hit you in the face. So I have eye protection, face protection. I got gloves and everything so that I don't have any accidents. All right, here we go. I turn it up until I have a significant amount of unbalance. It's doing pretty good. Okay, I'm going to stop there at 520 RPM and I'll start turning. Oops, need to tighten my tool rest. Okay, we've turned it to where it's round this way, and no attempt has been made to try to make the surface smooth or anything. We're just rough turning the bowl. The reason we're just rough turning is because logs contain moisture unless they've been stored in a dry place or in a kiln or something like that. And so we have to allow the bowl to dry before we do a final turn. The reason for allowing it to dry before we do the final turn is because wood is notorious for warping and for moving and changing during the drying process. So we have to allow it to dry it and return it such that it becomes true again. Okay, now what I've got to do is to mount the chuck onto the bowl. And the chuck is just an easy way to manipulate the bowl on the lathe. And a lot of people do final turnings and just allow it to warp, and then they just settle for the warped bowl. So they would go through the process of finishing this right now, but I don't do it that way. So we're going to turn a what they call a tenon, and a tenon is a projection in the wood so that I can clamp onto it with this chuck. And so to do that, we have to measure the inside of the chuck, and I've got a set of calipers that's already set to the size of the chuck. I've got to have enough room to clamp down, but not too much. If you expand the jaws over a large tenon, then only the corners of the chuck will be in contact with the wood. But the way the chuck jaws are made is they turn them in a metal lathe in a complete circle, not 4 segments. They do a complete turn, and then they cut the jaws into 4 segments. That kerf from the saw that they use is about an 1/8 inch. And so you open the jaws about an 1/8 inch, measure them with the calipers, and then cut the tenon to fit the jaws that are open about an 1/8 inch. And then you tighten it down. Now you should probably go open a little more, and what I'll do is correct over here whenever I start cutting it, and not cut it quite down quite as much as the calipers tell me to. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate how you mark out the tenon. Now you carefully place the calipers over the wood, and then you press the side nearest me against the bowl. Don't press the other one, or it'll flip it up in your face. So I press it in. I can see where the mark is made, and I can correct my location by moving it a little bit and cutting another groove. Oop, see what it does? So now I'm going to mark it with a pencil, and now I'm ready to cut the tenon. And just keep filming there, and I'll show how to do that. I'll make it a little deeper than that. I actually have the wrong tool. Just a second. Okay, that's tinning. And now I notice that we have too much wood right here to mount in the lathe, because you see there's no recess for that to fit inside of that chuck. So I'm going to have to make it a little thinner so I can knock it off with the chisel. Make it a little smaller. Not cooperating with me. Okay, now we're ready to mount the chuck. Now, I should be able to reverse it and everything work. Now I'm going to scoot the tailstock out of the way. Dismount the bowl. I'm taking the whole faceplate off and everything. Okay, now the bowl is mounted from the bottom on the tenon that we made in the chuck, and now we don't have any use for this faceplate, so I'm going to take it off. Go ahead and turn it off. Okay, I have removed the faceplate, and you'll notice that the screw holes are well inside the perimeter of the bowl. And so when we're mounting the faceplate, we have to make sure that the screw holes won't intersect with the surface of the bowl in its finished state. And these, though they had some fairly long screws, will be all hollowed out. So you have to remember that when you're mounting them, so that you don't get fouled up with the screw holes. All right, now I've brought the tailstock up, but I haven't put the center into the bowl. And if you remember, when we mounted the faceplate, we just approximated the center of the bowl, really not paying a whole lot of attention with precision. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the lathe, and then I'm going to seat the tailstock on its center as it's rotating, and that way we get the true center of the bowl. Okay, we're ready to start. Now we need to true up the front portion of the open end of the bowl, and then we'll begin to hollow. And you'll just get to see the first part of that, and then I'll meet you back after it's hollowed out. Okay, we've got it partially hollowed out, but there was a little mishap just a little earlier, and I want to show you what I should have done. Okay, right now I'm using a S-shaped tool rest, and I was turning this out inside, hollowing it out, and leaving the stem in the middle for stability. And I got this far, and my tool jumped out of the groove and hit the stem and broke the stem. When it did that, it put enough torque on the connection that the chuck had with the bowl and tilted it off to one side. And it didn't hurt the bowl any, but I had done something earlier, or had not done something earlier, that I should have. Oh, let me show you what happened. This segment popped out. Now I no longer have the support for this. Now I could go ahead and go in there and go ahead and use, and I may do that, and use what's left of it. But one of the things that I should have done earlier was to reinforce the tenon needed on the back of the bowl at the interface with the chuck. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Taking it out of the chuck, and let's look at the tenon. And Sycamore is a fairly soft wood, so therefore the tenon needs to be really good. And in order to get it that good, what I do is put cyanacrylic glue. They call it CA glue, or the more common vernacular, it's super glue. And they have several grades of it. This is a water thin CA glue, and this soaks into the wood very quickly and dries very quickly, and I'll show you what I do with it. I just apply it down the groove there, and it essentially makes an acrylic bond with the wood, and so the added strength of the acrylic in the capillary tubes in the wood causes it to be very strong. And now we're going to let that dry for just a few minutes. 2 minutes is enough, but I let it go a little longer, like 5 minutes, and then we'll put it back on the lathe and start again. See you then. Okay, the CA glue has dried, and now I'm ready to mount it back into the chuck. Now it's really strong now, so I can really put the force on it. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the tailstock again. I'm going to bring it up. That is, if I can get my tool rest properly located. Well, I'm not going to be able to get my tool rest in there right, so I'm not going to be able to use the tailstock. Now, one of the things about the tailstock is it's got a very fine point, and if you push it back and you leave that there and you're working here and you forget, your elbow gets that, and there are not good words said after that. So, take it out. I usually say darn. That's about as bad as I get. Okay, now that's safe. Now I can pull this around and get my tool rest in a position that works better for turning. Now, I was going to a lot of trouble to try to keep that center pillar in there, and so I'm going to have to be careful that I don't knock this off center. I think it's fairly strong now, especially with that CA glue, but I'm still going to take it easy. Alright, here we go. Okay, I've finished the bolt, but only for the rough turn. As you can see, I've left about an inch thickness on the bowl, all the way down through the bottom, and of course up to the other side. And it takes about 6 months to a year, depending on the wood, for a bowl an inch thick to dry. So we got a long wait before we can I can show you how this bowl is finished. But we can pick another bowl and go through the finish process on another bowl that is already dried. And that will be, if I can find one, that'll be what we do on the next video, is to take a dried bowl in the warped condition and true it up again bring it down to a finished thickness, which is something like a 1/4 inch or slightly thinner, and do the finish work on it. But for this is how you rough turn a bowl. See you next time. Okay, I thought I'd add this to the video, and that is the size of the bowl. This bowl is about 12.5 inches across the mouth and 10 3/4 in the opening. And the depth of the bowl on the outside is about 7 1/8. And on the inside it's about 5 3/4. So it's a pretty good sized bowl. And it's liable to end up being a pretty nice looking one. Alright.